Rejected by my pack. A werewolf romance story written by Nini Peters. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like secrets refusing to be told. Arya pressed her back against the rough bark of an ancient oak, her heart hammering against her ribs as she listened to the distant sounds of the pack gathering for the dawn hunt. She could hear their laughter, their easy camaraderie, the way their voices wove together like a tapestry she had never quite learned to be part of. For 23 years she had lived on the periphery of the Shadow Moon pack, always watching from the edges, always wondering what it felt like to belong. The rejection still burned fresh in her memory, 3 years ago when she had dared to hope that Marcus, the beta's son, might see her as more than the quiet girl who helped tend the injured. Instead, he had laughed, cruel and cutting, telling her that someone like her would never be worthy of a true wolf's affection. "You're broken, Arya," he had said, his words echoing in the pack house for all to hear. Damaged goods. Who would want someone whose own parents abandoned her to die in the woods? The memory made her flinch even now. She had been found as a barely breathing infant at the pack's borders, taken in more out of duty than love. The story of her rescue had become pack legend, but not in the way that made her feel special. Instead, it marked her as different, as other, as someone who would never truly understand what it meant to be born into the security of belonging. A branch snapped behind her, and Arya spun around, her enhanced senses immediately on high alert. The scent hit her first, pine, leather, and something uniquely masculine that made her wolf stir restlessly beneath her skin. Then she saw him emerge from the shadows between the trees, and her breath caught in her throat. Nicholas moved through the forest like he owned it, which in many ways he did. As the alpha of the Shadow Moon pack, every tree, every blade of grass, every creature that drew breath within their territory fell under his protection. But it wasn't his authority that made Arya's pulse quicken, it was the way he carried himself, with a quiet confidence that spoke of someone who had earned his power rather than simply inheriting it. His dark hair caught the filtered sunlight streaming through the canopy above, and when his steel-gray eyes found hers, she felt something shift deep inside her chest. This close, she could see the small scar that ran along his jawline, a reminder of the battle that had claimed his father's life and elevated him to alpha at the young age of 28. "You're missing the hunt," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her bones. Arya lifted her chin, fighting the urge to look away. "I prefer to hunt alone." "Do you?" There was no mockery in his tone, only genuine curiosity. "And what do you hunt for, Arya?" The way he said her name, soft and careful, as if it were something precious, made her stomach flutter. She had grown accustomed to being invisible, to moving through the pack like a ghost that everyone could see but no one truly acknowledged. Having his full attention felt overwhelming and thrilling in equal measure. "Peace," she answered honestly, surprising herself with the admission. Something flickered across his features. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition. "It's hard to find peace when you're always running from something." His words hit closer to home than she cared to admit. Before she could respond, the sound of howls erupted from deeper in the forest, but these weren't the celebratory calls of a successful hunt. These were warnings, urgent and sharp with alarm. Nicholas's entire demeanor shifted in an instant, his body going taut with readiness. "Rogues?" he growled, his eyes already beginning to glow with the amber light that preceded a shift. The attack came without further warning. 3 massive wolves burst through the underbrush, their eyes wild with bloodlust and their sense corrupted by the madness that claimed those who abandoned pack law. Arya barely had time to dodge as the largest of them lunged for her throat, his teeth snapping inches from her jugular. She hit the ground hard, rolling to avoid the second attacker's claws. Her wolf was screaming at her to shift, to fight, but years of keeping herself small and unnoticed had made the transformation difficult when she was panicked. Fear clouded her judgment as the rogue circled back for another strike. Then Nicholas was there, his shift happening so smoothly it seemed like liquid shadow. His massive black wolf form collided with the rogue in mid-leap, sending them both crashing into a cluster of saplings. The sounds of their battle were primal and fierce, snarls, snapping teeth, the wet sound of claws finding flesh. Arya forced herself to her feet, her hands shaking as adrenaline coursed through her veins. The second rogue was advancing on her again, foam flecking his muzzle, his eyes vacant with the madness that consumed wolves who had lived too long without pack bonds. She closed her eyes, reaching deep for the wolf that had always felt just slightly out of reach. The shift came suddenly, her bones reshaping, muscles stretching and reforming. When she opened her amber eyes, the world looked different. Sharper, more vivid, filled with scents and sounds that her human form could never fully appreciate. Her wolf was smaller than most, her coat a silvery gray that reminded her why the pack had sometimes whispered that she might not be fully one of them. But size didn't matter when survival was on the line. She met the rogue's charge head-on, using her speed and agility to stay just out of reach of his snapping jaws. She could hear Nicholas still engaged with the larger rogue, could smell his blood mixing with his opponent's in the morning air. The third rogue had been circling, waiting for an opportunity. He found it when Arya stumbled over a fallen log, her attention split between her own attacker and her desperate worry for Nicholas. The rogue lunged and she barely got her paws under her in time to avoid having her throat torn out. Nicholas's howl of rage echoed through the forest as he saw her danger. With a final vicious snap of his jaws, he ended his opponent and wheeled toward her. But he was too far away, and the rogue was already airborne, claws extended toward her exposed flank. The impact never came. Instead, Arya heard a familiar snarl and saw a blur of russet fur slam into the rogue from the side. Nyra, her closest friend and one of the few pack members who had ever shown her genuine kindness, had arrived like an avenging angel. The battle was over quickly after that. Between Nicholas's raw power and Nyra's fierce loyalty, the remaining rogues were either dead or fleeing back into the wild lands beyond their territory. Arya shifted back to human form, her body aching and her clothes torn from her hasty transformation. "Are you hurt?" Nicholas was beside her before she fully realized he had shifted back, his hands gentle as they checked her arms and shoulders for injury. The concern in his eyes made something warm unfurl in her chest. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice came out shakier than she intended. "Thank you. Both of you." Nyra, now back in human form with her wild red hair tangled with leaves and twigs, grinned despite the blood on her lip. "That's what friends are for. Though next time, maybe don't go wandering off alone when there are rogues about." Arya felt heat creep up her neck. "I didn't know." "No one blames you," Nicholas said firmly, his hand still resting on her shoulder. The warmth of his touch seemed to seep through her skin and settle in her bones. Rogues are unpredictable. They could have attacked anywhere at any time. The way he defended her, without hesitation or qualification, made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. She was used to being the pack's afterthought, the one who was tolerated rather than embraced. Having someone like Nicholas speak for her felt surreal. "We should get back," Nyra said, glancing around at the destruction their battle had left behind. "The others will want to know about this attack." Nicholas nodded, but his eyes remained on Arya. "Will you walk with me?" It wasn't really a request, not when it came from the Alpha, but something in his tone made it feel like a choice. Arya found herself nodding before she could think better of it. They made their way back toward the pack house in comfortable silence, with Nyra ranging ahead to scout for any other threats. The forest felt different now, charged with the aftermath of violence but also with something else, a sense of possibility that Arya had never dared to entertain. "You fought well," Nicholas said eventually, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I panicked," she corrected, remembering how long it had taken her to shift, how clumsy she had been in her wolf form. "You survived. You adapted. That's what matters." He paused, stepping over a fallen branch. "Your wolf is beautiful, by the way. That silver coat, I've never seen anything like it." Arya's step faltered slightly. The color of her wolf had always been another mark of her difference, another sign that she didn't quite belong. To hear Nicholas call it beautiful felt like being offered a gift she didn't know how to accept. "It's not normal," she said quietly. "Normal is overrated." There was something in his voice that made her glance up at him, and when their eyes met, she saw a warmth there that took her breath away. Some of the most extraordinary things in this world are the ones that don't fit the mold. They had reached the edge of the pack lands, where the wild forest gave way to the carefully maintained grounds surrounding the pack house. Arya could see other wolves moving about their daily routines, and she felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came with returning to a place where she was always slightly on the outside looking in. But then Nicholas's hand brushed against hers, just the barest whisper of contact, and something inside her settled. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had always believed. The pack house was buzzing with activity when they arrived. Word of the rogue attack had already spread, and wolves were gathering in the great hall to hear Nicholas's report. Arya started to slip away toward her small room in the back of the house, the place where she had always retreated when pack business was being conducted. "Stay," Nicholas said, his voice quiet but unmistakably an alpha command. "You were there. Your perspective matters." Arya felt every eye in the room turn to her, and her first instinct was to shrink back, to make herself invisible the way she always had. But something about the way Nicholas stood beside her, solid and unwavering, gave her the courage to lift her chin and meet their stares. Marcus was there, his lip curled in the familiar expression of disdain he wore whenever he looked at her. Beside him stood Celine, her perfectly styled blonde hair and flawless features making Arya acutely aware of her own disheveled appearance. Celine's blue eyes were cold as they assessed the torn fabric of Arya's shirt and the scratches on her arms. 3 rogues attacked near the eastern border, Nicholas began, his alpha voice carrying easily through the large room. They were eliminated, but their presence suggests there may be more in the area. We need to increase patrols and travel in groups until we're certain the threat has passed. How did they get so close without being detected? Asked Thomas, one of the senior wolves. His question carried an undertone of accusation that made Arya's stomach clench. They were downwind and moving carefully, Nicholas replied evenly. It could have happened to anyone. But it happened to her, Marcus said, jerking his chin toward Arya. Funny how trouble seems to follow her around. The words hit their mark, and Arya felt the familiar burn of shame creep up her neck. She started to step back to remove herself from the conversation, but Nicholas moved slightly, placing himself between her and Marcus's cruel gaze. Arya fought bravely, he said, his voice carrying a warning that made Marcus's eyes widen slightly. Without her quick thinking and Nyra's assistance, the situation could have been much worse. Celine's laugh was like breaking glass. Quick thinking? From what I heard, she froze up completely. Had to be rescued like some helpless human. The room fell silent, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Arya felt the weight of every gaze, the judgment that had followed her for years crystallizing in this moment. She wanted to defend herself, to point out that she had fought, that she had survived, but the words stuck in her throat. Enough. Nicholas's voice was quiet, but it carried the full weight of his authority. I won't have pack members attacking each other with gossip and innuendo. We have real threats to focus on. He dismissed the gathering with a few more instructions about patrol schedules and safety protocols, but Arya barely heard them. She was too focused on the way Celine was looking at her, with a hatred so pure and bright it was almost beautiful in its intensity. As the crowd dispersed, Celine brushed past Arya, her shoulder connecting just hard enough to send a message. This isn't over, she whispered, too low for anyone else to hear. Arya watched her go, ice settling in her veins. She had always known that some pack members resented her presence, but she had never realized how deep that resentment ran. Celine had always been one of the pack's golden children, beautiful, talented, born to a respected family. If the rumors were true, she had also harbored hopes of becoming Nicholas's mate, of standing beside him as the pack's Luna. Don't let her get under your skin, Nyra said, appearing at Arya's elbow. Celine's just jealous because Nicholas actually noticed you exist. He was just being kind, Arya protested, but even as she said it, she couldn't quite convince herself it was true. There had been something in the way he looked at her, in the way he had defended her, that felt like more than simple alpha duty. Kind my ass, Nyra snorted. I've known Nicholas for 15 years and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you today. Celine knows it too, which is why she's acting like a territorial bitch. Before Arya could respond, Nicholas appeared beside them, moving with that fluid grace that marked him as a natural leader. Arya, could I speak with you privately? Nyra grinned and made herself scarce, leaving Arya alone with the alpha in the now empty great hall. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and possibilities that seemed too fragile to examine too closely. I'm sorry about what happened in there, Nicholas said finally. You shouldn't have to endure that kind of treatment from your own pack. It's nothing new, Arya replied, trying to keep her voice light. I'm used to it. You shouldn't have to be. There was something fierce in his tone that made her look up at him. You're a valued member of this pack, Arya. It's time everyone started acting like it. The conviction in his voice made her chest tight with emotion she didn't know how to name. No one had ever spoken about her like that, as if she mattered, as if she deserved better than the scraps of acceptance she had always been given. Why? She whispered, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Why do you care? Nicholas stepped closer, and she could smell that intoxicating scent of pine and leather, could see the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. Because I see you, he said simply. The real you. The strength you try to hide, the courage you don't even know you possess. You're extraordinary, Arya, and I'm tired of watching you pretend otherwise. His words hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and making her heart race. She wanted to believe him, wanted to step into the warmth of his regard and let it fill all the cold, empty spaces inside her. But years of rejection and disappointment had taught her to be cautious. You don't know me, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Then let me, he replied, reaching out to touch her cheek with a gentleness that made her eyes flutter closed. Let me know you, Arya. All of you. For a moment, she allowed herself to lean into his touch, to imagine what it might be like to be chosen, to be wanted by someone like him. But then reality crashed back in, bringing with it all the reasons why this could never work. I should go, she said, stepping back from his touch. I have things to do. She saw something flicker across his features, disappointment, perhaps, or frustration, but he didn't try to stop her as she hurried from the room. She could feel his eyes on her as she left, and the weight of his gaze followed her all the way to her quarters. The days that followed were a strange dance of avoidance and awareness. Arya found herself hyper-conscious of Nicholas's presence whenever he was near, her body seeming to tune itself to his frequency like a radio searching for a signal. She caught him watching her during meals, during pack meetings, during the quiet moments when she thought no one was paying attention. Celine noticed too, and her resentment grew more obvious with each passing day. She made cutting remarks about Arya's clothes, her hair, her quiet demeanor. She questioned Arya's contributions during pack discussions and found fault with everything from the way she walked to the way she breathed. She's really starting to piss me off, Naira muttered one evening as they sat by the fire pit behind the pack house. If she doesn't back off soon, I'm going to introduce her face to my fist. Arya poked at the flames with a stick, watching sparks rise into the darkening sky. It's not worth it. She'll get bored eventually. Will she? Naira's voice was skeptical. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like she's just getting started. And Nicholas defending you the other day only made her more determined to prove you don't belong here. The sad thing was, Celine wasn't wrong. Arya didn't belong here, not really. She was a foundling, a charity case that the pack had taken in out of obligation rather than love. No matter how kind Nicholas was to her, no matter how his attention made her feel, that fundamental truth remained unchanged. Maybe she's right, Arya said quietly. Maybe I should just leave. Find another pack or go rogue or… Don't you dare finish that sentence. Naira's voice was sharp with anger. You belong here just as much as anyone else. More than some people if you ask me. At least you contribute something useful instead of just looking pretty and causing drama. Before Arya could respond, the smell of smoke reached her nostrils. Not the clean scent of their campfire, but something acrid and wrong, carrying the stench of burning vegetation and something else, something chemical that made her wolf recoil in alarm. They were on their feet instantly, turning toward the source of the smell. Orange light flickered through the trees to the east, and Arya's blood turned to ice as she realized what she was seeing. Fire, she breathed, her voice barely audible over the crackling of flames that seemed to be growing louder by the second. The forest was burning and it was coming their way fast. The next few minutes were chaos. Wolves poured out of the pack house as the alarm was raised, some shifting immediately to help fight the fire while others began evacuating the most vulnerable members of the pack. Arya found herself swept up in the desperate effort to create firebreaks and save what they could of their territory. But as she worked alongside the others, hauling water and helping to clear brush that might fuel the flames, a terrible realization began to take hold. The fire wasn't spreading naturally. It was moving in a deliberate pattern, following a path that seemed designed to drive the pack toward the western edge of their territory, where the ground was unstable and retreat would be difficult. Someone had set this fire intentionally. Someone who knew their territory well enough to weaponize it against them. The thought was still forming in her mind when she heard Celine's voice, high and frightened, calling for help from somewhere deeper in the burning woods. Without thinking, Arya dropped the bucket she had been carrying and ran toward the sound, ignoring Naira's shouts for her to stop. She found Celine trapped beneath a fallen tree, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle and tears streaming down her smoke-stained face. The flames were closing in from three sides, and there was no clear path to safety. Arya. Celine's voice was raw with terror and pain. Please help me. I can't move. For a moment, Arya hesitated. This was the woman who had made her life miserable, who had questioned her worth at every turn, who had looked at her with undisguised hatred just days before. It would be easy to turn away, to let the fire claim the person who had tried so hard to drive her from the pack. But that wasn't who she was. Whatever else Celine had done, she was still pack, still family in the complicated way that bound them all together. Arya couldn't live with herself if she walked away now. She grabbed the fallen tree and tried to lift it, but it was too heavy for her human strength. Closing her eyes, she reached for her wolf, letting the transformation flow through her more smoothly than it ever had before. In wolf form, she had better leverage, and with desperate strength born of adrenaline and determination, she managed to shift the tree just enough for Celine to drag herself free. The return journey was a nightmare of smoke and heat and falling debris. Celine was barely conscious, her injured leg making it impossible for her to shift or move quickly. Arya had to support most of her weight, her lungs burning with each breath as they fought their way through the maze of flames. They almost didn't make it. A burning branch fell across their path just as they reached what should have been safety, and for a terrifying moment, Arya thought they were trapped. Then strong arms were lifting Celine away from her, and she found herself looking up into Nicholas's soot-stained face. "Are you insane?" he demanded even as he cradled both women against his chest. "You could have been killed." She was in trouble, Arya gasped, her throat raw from smoke inhalation. "I couldn't just leave her." Something shifted in his expression as he looked down at her, an emotion too complex to name. "No," he said softly. "You couldn't. Because that's who you are." The fire was finally contained just before dawn, thanks to a combination of pack effort and a timely shift in the wind that drove the flames away from their most critical structures. The damage was extensive but not catastrophic. They had lost some of the outer buildings and a significant portion of their hunting grounds, but the pack house and most of their territory remained intact. Celine was taken to the pack's healer, her injury serious but not life-threatening. As the sun rose over the smoke-damaged landscape, Arya found herself standing alone by the ruins of what had once been a beautiful grove of flowering trees. The senseless destruction made her heart ache, but it was nothing compared to the cold certainty that was settling in her bones. She had seen something in the pattern of the fire, something that spoke of intimate knowledge of their territory and their routines. This hadn't been a random attack by rogues or a natural disaster. Someone with access to the pack lands had deliberately tried to destroy everything they held dear. And Arya was beginning to suspect she knew who. "The elders want to see you." Nyra's voice made her turn, and Arya felt her stomach drop at the expression on her friend's face. There was worry there, and anger, and something that looked dangerously close to fear. "What for?" "Questions about the fire. About how it started and why you were the one who found Celine and—" Nyra's voice trailed off, but Arya could fill in the blanks. The pack was looking for someone to blame, and she was the obvious choice. The outsider, the foundling, the one who had always been different. Never mind that she had risked her life to save one of her accusers. Never mind that she had fought beside them to save their home. "They think I started it," Arya said, her voice flat with resignation. "Some of them do." Nyra's honesty was brutal but necessary. "Marcus has been spreading rumors, saying it's too convenient that you were right there when Celine needed help. He's suggesting you set the fire to make yourself look like a hero." The accusation was so absurd, so malicious, that for a moment Arya couldn't even respond. She had nearly died trying to save Celine's life, had breathed smoke and burned her hands dragging her to safety, and now she was being accused of causing the very disaster she had helped fight. "You have to defend yourself," Nyra continued urgently. "You can't just stand there and let them destroy you with lies." But Arya wasn't sure she had the strength left to fight. The years of being on the outside, of being tolerated rather than accepted, had worn her down more than she wanted to admit. Maybe it would be easier to just accept whatever judgment they handed down and disappear into the world beyond the pack lands. The Council of Elders met in the oldest part of the pack house, a stone chamber that had been carved from the living rock of the mountain centuries ago. The weight of history pressed down on Arya as she stood before the 5 ancient wolves who had guided the pack through wars and disasters, triumphs and tragedies. Elder Moira, the eldest among them, spoke first. Her voice was paper dry with age but still carried the authority of someone who had earned respect through decades of service. "Arya, you stand accused of deliberately setting fire to pack lands with the intent to cause harm and to elevate your own standing through false heroics. How do you answer these charges?" The formal language made the accusation seem even more surreal. Arya looked around the chamber, noting who had come to witness her trial. Marcus was there, wearing an expression of smug satisfaction. Several other pack members had gathered as well, their faces ranging from curious to openly hostile. Celine sat in the front row, her injured leg propped up and her face carefully neutral. When their eyes met, Arya thought she saw something flicker across the other woman's features. Guilt, perhaps, or uncertainty. Nicholas stood near the back of the chamber, his face a mask of controlled fury. Arya could feel the weight of his gaze, the way his wolf was pushing against his human control. But he couldn't speak for her here. This was her moment to stand or fall on her own. "I didn't set the fire," she said simply. "I would never do anything to harm this pack or its members." "Yet you were conveniently positioned to play the hero when Celine needed rescue," Marcus interjected, ignoring the sharp look Elder Moira sent his way. Some might say that's quite a coincidence. Some might say that you're more interested in finding a scapegoat than discovering the truth, Arya replied, surprised by her own boldness. A murmur ran through the gathered wolves, and she saw Nicholas's eyes flash with what might have been approval. Encouraged, she continued. I was sitting by the fire pit with Naira when we smelled smoke. We responded immediately, as did everyone else. If I had wanted to set a fire for dramatic purposes, don't you think I would have chosen a location that didn't put the entire pack at risk? Perhaps you miscalculated, suggested Elder Thomas, his weathered face skeptical. Perhaps the fire spread faster than you intended. The casual assumption of her guilt made anger flare in Arya's chest, hot and bright as the flames that had nearly consumed them all. For years she had accepted the pack's judgment, had internalized their belief that she was somehow less worthy, less valuable than those who had been born into their ranks. But standing here, facing accusations that could see her exiled or worse, something inside her finally rebelled. You want to know what I think? She said, her voice rising as emotion overcame caution. I think someone did set that fire deliberately. Someone who knows our territory well enough to predict how we would respond. Someone who wanted to hurt this pack, to destroy what we've built together. She took a breath, her heart hammering as she prepared to voice the suspicion that had been growing in her mind. But I also think that whoever set the fire didn't expect anyone to get trapped in it. I think they expected us all to evacuate safely while our home burned around us. I think they were trying to send a message, not commit murder. And who do you think would do such a thing? Elder Moira asked, her ancient eyes sharp with interest. This was the moment of truth, the point where Arya had to decide whether to voice her suspicions or retreat into safe silence. She thought of Celine's hatred, of the way the other woman had looked at her with such venom. She thought of the pattern of the fire, the way it had seemed designed to cause maximum damage with minimum risk to life. She thought of the chemical smell she had detected beneath the natural scent of burning wood. I don't know, she said finally, and saw disappointment flicker across several faces. But I know it wasn't me. And I know that anyone who would risk our entire territory to make a point is someone we need to find and stop. The elders conferred in low voices for several long minutes while Arya stood silent, her fate hanging in the balance. She could feel the tension in the room, the way the gathered pack members seemed divided between those who believed her and those who remained convinced of her guilt. Finally, Elder Moira spoke again. The evidence against you is circumstantial at best, she said. While your presence at the scene raises questions, your actions during and after the fire speak to a commitment to pack welfare that argues against deliberate sabotage. Relief flooded through Arya, making her knees weak. However, the elder continued, and Arya's heart sank again, the suspicions raised by your pack mates cannot be ignored. Until the true culprit is found, you will be restricted to the pack house and its immediate grounds. You will not participate in patrols or hunts, and you will be accompanied by another pack member at all times. It was better than exile, but not by much. Arya found herself essentially under house arrest, marked as a suspect in the eyes of everyone who mattered. She nodded acceptance of the elder's judgment, not trusting her voice to remain steady. As the gathering dispersed, she felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to find Celine beside her, leaning heavily on a walking stick. Thank you, the other woman said quietly, her voice barely audible over the murmur of conversation around them. For saving me. I know you didn't have to. There was something in Celine's eyes that made Arya study her more closely, some emotion that didn't quite match her words. But before she could analyze it further, Celine was gone, limping away with the help of another pack member. The days of house arrest that followed were among the most difficult of Arya's life. She was cut off from the pack activities that had given structure to her days, forbidden from the solitary walks in the forest that had always been her refuge. Worse, she could feel the weight of suspicion pressing down on her wherever she went. Some pack members went out of their way to avoid her, as if her alleged crimes might be contagious. Others stared openly, their expressions ranging from curious to accusatory. Even those who seemed to believe in her innocence treated her with a careful politeness that was almost worse than outright hostility. The only bright spots in her confinement were Naira's loyal friendship and Nicholas's quiet support. Her friend visited daily, smuggling news from the outside world and providing a much-needed connection to normalcy. Nicholas was more circumspect, limited by his position as alpha from showing too much favoritism to someone under investigation, but Arya caught him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. It was during the second week of her confinement that everything changed. Arya was in the pack library trying to lose herself in a book about pack history, when she heard raised voices from the courtyard below. Looking out the window, she saw a commotion near the main gate, where a group of pack members had gathered around someone who appeared to be injured. Even from a distance, she could smell the scent of burns and smoke, and her wolf stirred restlessly as memories of the fire came flooding back. Moving closer to the window, she tried to get a better look at what was happening. The injured wolf was a stranger, his clothes torn and his skin marked with fresh burns. He was talking rapidly to Nicholas, gesturing toward the forest with urgent, jerky movements. Even without being able to hear his words, Arya could tell that something terrible had happened. Within minutes, the pack house was buzzing with activity as warriors prepared for what looked like a rescue mission. Arya watched from her window, frustrated by her inability to help, as her pack mates disappeared into the forest she was forbidden to enter. They returned hours later, grim-faced and carrying 3 unconscious wolves who looked like they had barely escaped with their lives. The stranger who had brought the news was identified as a member of the Crescent Falls pack, a smaller group that shared borders with their territory to the north. The news he brought was devastating. Someone had attacked the Crescent Falls pack house during their monthly gathering, setting fire to the building and attempting to trap the entire pack inside. Only quick thinking and a bit of luck had allowed most of them to escape, but several wolves were missing, and their alpha was among the critically injured. The attack bore all the hallmarks of the fire that had damaged Shadowmoon territory: the same deliberate pattern, the same chemical accelerant, the same intimate knowledge of pack habits and vulnerabilities. Most importantly for Arya, it had happened while she was under constant supervision, making it impossible for her to have been involved. "The elders want to see you again," Naira reported that evening, her face bright with relief. "Looks like your house arrest is about to end." The second council meeting was much shorter than the first. Elder Moira offered a formal apology for the suspicions cast on Arya's character, acknowledging that the attack on Crescent Falls proved she couldn't have been responsible for either fire. "We were wrong to doubt you," the elder said, her voice heavy with regret. "Your loyalty to this pack has never been in question, and we should have recognized that from the beginning." Arya accepted the apology with grace, though the damage to her standing in the pack would take time to heal. More concerning was the identity of the real arsonist, someone who clearly had access to multiple pack territories and a deep understanding of werewolf society. The investigation that followed revealed disturbing patterns. 3 other packs had suffered similar attacks over the past 6 months, each one more sophisticated than the last. The perpetrator was escalating, growing bolder with each successful strike. It was Nicholas who made the connection that broke the case wide open. "The timing," he said during an emergency pack meeting, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Every attack happened during a significant pack gathering, hunts, ceremonies, meetings. Someone who knew our schedules, our routines." His gray eyes swept the assembled wolves, and Arya saw several pack members shift uncomfortably under his scrutiny. The implication was clear: the saboteur was one of their own. "That's impossible," Marcus protested. "No pack member would." "Wouldn't they?" Nicholas's voice cut through the denial like a blade. "Someone desperate enough, angry enough, might convince themselves that destroying what they couldn't have was justified." Arya felt ice form in her veins as she realized where his logic was leading. Around the room, other pack members were beginning to reach the same conclusion, their gazes turning toward one conspicuously absent figure. Celine hadn't attended the meeting. In fact, no one had seen her since the morning after the Crescent Falls attack had been reported. The search for Celine revealed a carefully constructed web of deception. Hidden in her room were detailed maps of all the affected territories, sketches of pack house layouts, and most damning of all, several containers of the same chemical accelerant that had been used in the fires. But Celine herself was gone, vanished into the wilderness with nothing but a brief note left behind. "If I can't have him, then none of us deserve to have anything." The words chilled Arya to the bone. All of this destruction, all of this pain and terror, because Celine couldn't accept that Nicholas's heart belonged to someone else. "She's heading for the old caves," Nicholas announced after studying the evidence. "It's the only place she could hide long enough to plan another attack." The caves he referred to were part of pack legend, ancient tunnels that honeycombed the mountain behind their territory. They had been used as refuges during the werewolf wars centuries ago, but most of the entrances had been sealed or forgotten over time. "We'll need a full search party," Thomas suggested. "She could be anywhere in those tunnels." "No." Nicholas's voice was firm. "A large group would be too slow, too noisy. She'd hear us coming and disappear deeper into the mountain." "Then what do you suggest?" Elder Moira asked. Nicholas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he considered their options. When he spoke again, his words sent a chill through the assembled pack. I'll go alone. End this before she can hurt anyone else. The objections came immediately, voices raised in protest at the idea of their alpha facing a dangerous enemy without backup. But Arya barely heard them. Her attention was fixed on Nicholas, on the grim determination in his expression that told her he had already made up his mind. You can't, she found herself saying, her voice cutting through the arguments. She's counting on that. On you coming after her alone, driven by guilt and responsibility. Nicholas's eyes found hers across the room, and she saw something flicker in their depths, surprise perhaps, that she had spoken up in such a public forum. It's the only way, he said gently. As alpha, it's my responsibility too. It's a trap, Arya interrupted, her certainty growing stronger with each word. She wants you isolated, vulnerable. She's already proven she's willing to kill innocent people to get your attention. What do you think she'll do when she has you exactly where she wants you? The room fell silent as her words sank in. Arya could feel every eye on her, could sense the surprise and speculation her outburst had generated. She had never challenged Nicholas publicly before, had never presumed to question his judgment in front of the entire pack. But she couldn't stay silent, not when she could see so clearly how Celine's plan would unfold. The other woman was banking on Nicholas's sense of honor, his need to protect his pack, to draw him into a confrontation on her terms. Then what do you suggest? Nicholas asked, and there was no rebuke in his tone, only genuine curiosity about her perspective. Arya took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to propose. Send me. The explosion of voices that followed was immediate and overwhelming. Wolves shouted objections, called her crazy, demanded to know what possible advantage she could have over their alpha in a confrontation with Celine. But Nicholas raised a hand for silence, his eyes never leaving Arya's face. Explain. She hates me, Arya said simply. More than she hates anyone else because she sees me as the reason she can't have you. If I go to her, if I offer myself as a target, she'll be too focused on destroying me to think clearly about strategy. Absolutely not. Nicholas's voice was flat with rejection. I won't use you as bait. You won't be using me, Arya replied, lifting her chin with a defiance that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. I'm Valentirem. And unlike you, I'm not predictable to her. She doesn't know what I'm capable of because she's never bothered to look past her own hatred. The argument that followed was fierce and emotional, with pack members taking sides and voices raised in passionate debate. But through it all, Arya held her ground, meeting every objection with calm logic and unwavering determination. Finally, Elder Moira called for order. The girl has a point, she said, her ancient voice cutting through the chaos. Celine's obsession with her makes her vulnerable in ways she might not be with our alpha. It's too dangerous, Nicholas protested, but Arya could hear the conflict in his voice, the way his alpha instincts warred with his personal feelings. Everything about this situation is dangerous, Arya replied. But this way we have a chance to end it without more innocent lives being lost. In the end, it was Naira who provided the compromise that satisfied everyone's concerns. She doesn't go alone, her friend announced firmly. I go with her. Two of us, moving quietly with the rest of the pack positioned to provide backup if things go wrong. The plan that emerged from their discussions was elegant in its simplicity. Arya and Naira would approach the caves openly, making no attempt to hide their presence. When Celine revealed herself, and they were all confident she would, Arya would keep her talking while Naira maneuvered into position for a surprise attack. Meanwhile, the rest of the pack would be stationed at strategic points around the mountain, ready to move in if the situation deteriorated beyond their ability to handle. Remember, Nicholas said as they prepared to leave, his hands gentle as they checked Arya's equipment one final time. Your job is to distract her, not to engage. Let Naira handle the physical confrontation. Arya nodded, though they both knew that plans rarely survived contact with reality. Once she was face to face with Celine, anything could happen. Promise me something, Nicholas continued, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Promise me you'll come back. Because if something happens to you... He didn't finish the sentence, but Arya could see the raw emotion in his eyes, the fear that went beyond simple concern for a pack member's safety. I promise, she whispered, reaching up to touch his cheek. I'll come back to you. The kiss that followed was soft and desperate, full of all the words they hadn't had time to say. When they broke apart, Arya could taste the salt of tears on her lips, though she wasn't sure if they were his or hers. The journey to the caves took them through some of the most beautiful and treacherous terrain in their territory. Ancient trees towered overhead, their branches forming a canopy so thick that the forest floor was perpetually shrouded in twilight. Streams wound between moss-covered boulders, their voices joining in a symphony that should have been peaceful but felt ominous in the current circumstances. Arya and Naira moved in comfortable silence, their enhanced senses alert for any sign of danger. They had been friends for so long that words were often unnecessary, each could read the other's body language and intentions with ease. It was Naira who spotted the first sign that they were on the right track. A piece of torn fabric caught on a thorny bush, the color and texture matching the dress Celine had been wearing the last time anyone had seen her. "She's not even trying to hide her trail," Naira observed quietly. "Either she's lost her mind completely, or she wants us to find her." "Both, probably," Arya replied, studying the surrounding terrain. They were close to the cave system now, the rocky face of the mountain looming ahead of them like a sleeping giant. The entrance Celine had chosen was one of the larger ones, a yawning mouth in the stone that breathed cold air and ancient secrets. Someone had built a small fire just inside the opening, the smoke curling up into the afternoon sky like a banner announcing her presence. "Subtle," Naira muttered, but her attempt at humor fell flat in the face of what they were about to do. Arya stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain stillness. "Celine, I know you're in there. We need to talk." The silence that followed stretched on for so long that Arya began to wonder if they had guessed wrong, if Celine had moved on to another hiding place. Then a figure emerged from the shadows of the cave mouth, and Arya's breath caught in her throat. Celine looked nothing like the polished, beautiful woman who had tormented her for so long. Her blonde hair was matted and dirty, her clothes torn and stained with smoke and mud. But it was her eyes that truly shocked Arya. They burned with a madness so pure and bright that it was terrifying to behold. "Well, well," Celine said, her voice carrying a sing-song quality that raised the hair on the back of Arya's neck. "Look what the forest dragged in. The little foundling, come to play hero again." "This has to stop," Arya said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You've hurt innocent people, destroyed homes, terrorized entire packs. For what? Because you couldn't accept that Nicholas chose someone else." Celine's laugh was like breaking glass, sharp and painful to hear. "Chose? You think he chose you?" She stepped closer, and Arya could smell the acrid scent of smoke and chemicals clinging to her skin. "He pitied you. Poor little orphan girl, so grateful for any scrap of attention. Did you really think someone like him could love someone like you?" The words hit their mark, awakening all of Arya's old insecurities and fears. But instead of crumbling under the assault, she found herself standing straighter, drawing strength from sources she was only beginning to understand. "Maybe," she said quietly. "But that's between him and me. It doesn't justify what you've done. Doesn't it?" Celine's eyes blazed with righteous fury. "I was supposed to be his mate. I was born for that role, trained for it my entire life. I'm beautiful, powerful, connected to the best families in the pack. What are you? Nothing. A charity case who doesn't even know where she came from." "You're right," Arya said, and saw surprise flicker across Celine's face. "I don't know where I came from. I don't have a prestigious bloodline or a family name that means anything. All I have is what I've built with my own hands, my own choices." She took a step forward, ignoring the way Celine's hands twitched toward something hidden behind her back. "But you know what I've learned? Family isn't about blood. It's about the people who choose to stand by you, who see your worth even when you can't see it yourself. And Nicholas sees that worth in me just like I see it in him." "Lies," Celine snarled, but there was something desperate in her voice now, a crack in the certainty that had driven her to such extremes. "Is it?" Arya asked gently. "Then why are you so afraid of me? Why go to such lengths to destroy what I have if it means nothing?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with truth that neither woman could deny. Celine's beautiful face twisted with rage and pain, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely human. "Because I can't stand watching him look at you the way he should look at me. I can't stand knowing that everything I was promised, everything I worked for, went to someone who doesn't even deserve it." "And you think burning down our world will change that?" Arya asked. "You think destroying innocent lives will make him love you? If I can't have him, then no one can." Celine's hand finally revealed what she had been hiding, a bottle filled with the same chemical accelerant she had used in her previous attacks, its contents sloshing ominously as she raised it above her head. The cave behind her was suddenly, terrifyingly bright as flames erupted from the hidden depths. She had already set her final trap, Arya realized with growing horror. The ancient tunnels were filling with fire and smoke, and there was nowhere to run. "You want to be the hero so badly?" Celine screamed over the roar of flames. Then burn with me. She hurled the bottle at the cave mouth, where it shattered against the stone and sent liquid fire racing across the ground. Within seconds, they were surrounded by walls of flame that seemed to reach toward the sky itself. But Arya was no longer the frightened, uncertain girl who had frozen during the rogue attack. Weeks of soul-searching and self-discovery had awakened something fierce and primal within her, a strength that had been waiting for the right moment to emerge. She shifted faster than she ever had before, her wolf form flowing like liquid silver through the chaos. Celine, caught off guard by the speed of the transformation, stumbled backward as Arya leaped over the spreading flames. They collided in a tangle of claws and teeth, rolling across the rocky ground as the fire raged around them. Celine was strong and desperate, but Arya fought with the fury of someone who had finally found something worth protecting. The battle was fierce but brief. When it ended, Celine lay unconscious on the ground, her madness finally spent. Arya stood over her, panting heavily, her silver coat singed but her spirit unbroken. Nyra appeared through the smoke, having circled around to cut off any escape routes. Together, they dragged Celine to safety just as the cave system collapsed in on itself, sealing away the flames and the madness they had contained. The pack that greeted them upon their return was different from the one they had left. News of Arya's courage had spread quickly, and the wolves who had once looked at her with suspicion now regarded her with something approaching awe. But it was Nicholas's reaction that mattered most to her. He swept her into his arms the moment she came within reach, holding her so tightly that she could barely breathe. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered against her hair, his voice raw with emotion. "When we saw the flames." "You didn't lose me," she replied, pulling back to look into his eyes. "I told you I'd come back." What happened next felt like something out of a fairy tale. Nicholas dropped to one knee right there in front of the entire pack, taking her hands in his as he spoke words that would change everything. "Arya, you have shown courage that humbles me, strength that inspires me, and a heart that has captured mine completely. Will you do me the honor of becoming my mate, my Luna, my partner in all things?" The silence that followed was broken by Nyra's whoop of joy, and suddenly the air was filled with howls of approval and celebration. Arya felt tears streaming down her face as she gave the only answer her heart would allow. Yes. The mating ceremony that followed was unlike anything the pack had ever seen. Instead of the formal, traditional affair that might have been expected for an alpha's bonding, it became a celebration of love, acceptance, and the power of choosing your own family. Arya stood beside Nicholas as the ancient words were spoken, as the bonds that would tie them together for life were forged in ceremony and witnessed by their pack. When it came time for them to speak their own vows, her voice was strong and clear. "I was lost for so long," she said, her eyes never leaving his. "But you found me. You saw worth in me when I couldn't see it in myself. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. I promise to stand beside you, to lead with wisdom and compassion, to protect what we've built together." Nicholas's response was equally heartfelt. "You saved me too," he told her. "From a life of duty without joy, leadership without heart. You taught me that the strongest packs are built not on tradition or bloodlines, but on love and loyalty freely given." As they sealed their bond with a kiss that seemed to light up the very air around them, Arya felt something settle deep in her soul. The lost, lonely girl who had lived on the edges of belonging was gone, replaced by a woman who had found her place in the world. The months that followed brought new challenges as news of rogue activities increased along their borders. But Arya faced them with confidence, drawing on reserves of strength she had never known she possessed. She proved herself as a leader time and again, earning the respect and loyalty of wolves who had once questioned her right to stand among them. The pack itself began to change under her influence. The rigid hierarchies that had once defined their society softened, replaced by a more inclusive approach that valued contribution over birthright. Foundlings and adopted pack members found themselves welcomed in ways that previous generations had never experienced. But perhaps the most significant change was in Arya herself. The woman who had once fled from conflict now stood at the front lines when danger threatened their territory. When a coordinated attack by rogue forces finally came, she was ready. The battle was everything the pack had feared and prepared for. Dozens of rogue wolves, driven mad by isolation and hunger, descended on their territory like a plague. But they found a pack united in ways that previous generations had never achieved. Arya fought beside Nicholas with deadly precision, her silver wolf form becoming legendary among both allies and enemies. She saved lives, rallied the wounded, and proved that leadership was about more than giving orders, it was about inspiring others to be better than they thought possible. When the dust settled and the last of the rogues had been driven back into the wilderness, the pack that remained was forever changed. They had faced their greatest test and emerged stronger, more united than ever before. Standing in the aftermath of victory, surrounded by the wolves who had become her family in the truest sense of the word, Arya finally understood what home meant. It wasn't a place or a bloodline or a right of birth. Home was this: the trust of people who chose to follow you, the love of someone who saw your true worth, the knowledge that you belonged somewhere not because you had to, but because you were wanted. As Nicholas pulled her close, his voice warm with pride and love, Arya smiled up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She had traveled a long journey from the lost girl hiding in the forest, but every step had led her to this moment, this place, this pack that had become her everything. "What are you thinking about?" Nicholas asked, following her gaze upward. "Family," she replied, leaning into his warmth. "And how sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never dared to hope for." Around them, their pack was beginning to celebrate another victory, another day of survival and strength. But for Arya, the real victory was quieter, more personal. The knowledge that she had finally found where she belonged, and that no force on earth could take that away from her now. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility and challenges yet to come. But whatever awaited them, they would face it together. Not just as Alpha and Luna, but as partners, as equals, as two souls who had found in each other the missing pieces of themselves. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel for more captivating audiobook stories that will transport you to worlds beyond imagination. Your support means everything to creators like us who are passionate about bringing these magical stories to life. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart, share it with fellow lovers of supernatural romance, and let us know in the comments what kind of mystical adventure you'd like to hear next.